Seeds of Hope is a podcast created on the Lekwungen territory, represented today by Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. We feature special edition episodes at Shianu territory and shared Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh land. As uninvited guests, we hold with immense gratitude and respect the privilege it is to share and cultivate a climate-conscious community here on what we colonially refer to as Vancouver Island. Hi, I'm your host, Claire Marshall, and welcome to the Seeds of Hope Climate Storytelling Podcast. I'm going around my community to chat with folks who are passionate about all things climate, from advocating for more sustainable environmental practices to enhancing well-being through arts-based activities. Today, we're tuning into a conversation with Isabel from Wilderness Committee. Isabel is a climate campaigner who shares her story on how she got started in youth activism and how she dedicates her working days to building a decarbonized world centered deeply around social and environmental justice.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me. My name is Isabel. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm a climate campaigner with the Wilderness Committee. I was originally from the Boston area and I moved out here for university. And now I'm working on campaigns towards ending the fossil fuel industry expansion, and towards a climate just world. So yeah, that's a little bit.
I see that you're from the US, just like me, and you made the move to study and now work in what we colonially refer to as Canada. I'd love to hear more about your story, what brought you here, and what made you stay as part of your climate work. Was it a hard decision or did it feel natural? I know that's a lot of questions.
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces there. But yeah, I think the main reason I moved out here was for university. I went to UBC, where I studied international relations. I moved out during the pandemic, so it was a bit of a strange time, but I quickly just really enjoyed the city and getting time to spend, spending time here. Staying I think was not that hard a decision for me, just like through my work and through school and just the communities and people I'd met, the city felt like home. And so when I was looking for work and after I graduated, I felt it wasn't a hard choice to stay, and I was already pretty deeply involved in a lot of the movements here, and so I felt pretty invested in continuing to work and just stay here. So I didn't know anyone actually out here. I do have family in the San Francisco area and the LA area, so I'd spent time kind of on the West Coast. My brother lives in San Francisco now, and so I love the West Coast, but I didn't have specific connections or anything. I honestly just really was ready to move away from home and be somewhere different, and I think the opportunity just came up. Everything kind of lined up. Programs wise, scholarships wise, so I just went for it.
What was your program in school?
I studied international relations and did a minor in Spanish as well.
Are you just here now? Is this kind of home for you?
It is home for me until my work permit kicks me out. That is something I'll have to think about with permanent residency and just things like that, but here for now.
Is the West Coast the best coast, would you say?
I mean,
there are differences.
There are differences, but I do like it out here. I do like the vibes are just more chill.
They are, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Mountains.
Mountains are very cool.
So before stepping into your current climate role, you were involved in a lot of movement spaces, student organizing, housing justice, harm reduction, Palestinian solidarity. Can you walk us through how you found your way into each of those and what drew you into these different kind of areas of access and helping people out? Yeah,
in my first year, a lot of it was online, and I was really just seeking connection in any form to my peers, to my classmates, and I had one friend in one of my classes that we'd kind of made friends virtually. It is possible. And he was a member of the Social Justice Center at UBC, and he kind of just invited me to a meeting, and it was online, and I went, and I remember still the presentation. It was on housing justice, housing rights, specifically in Vancouver, and talking about issues that were very local, the temporary modular housing and things like that. And I remember it was just a really different way of learning. I think learning from peers and also just talking about issues that were really specific to the place that we were in a way that a lot of my classes didn't feel as like relevant sometimes. I just think there is something really powerful about like learning by doing and learning by talking to people and learning by being in the place that you're in, and connecting with the community beyond kind of the bubble of a university. And yeah, I just remember being really inspired by that meeting, and I kept coming back, and that was kind of how I fell into a lot of the movement spaces, because the three main like organizing areas with that group was housing justice, harm reduction, and international solidarity, specifically around Palestine. That was kind of how I became connected with all those different areas, and have kind of touched a lot of different areas through that group. And yeah, that was kind of how I ended up in those spaces.
What is VTU, if you don't mind?
Oh yeah, sorry. The Vancouver Tenants Union.
So really you felt like kind of your first sense of community being in like this new place and just like doing things hands-on versus like academia, which is just like teaching you things but not like actually putting you out there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's a theme that we've also talked about just in one of our like kind of climate and art centered episodes, where we just chatted about like what is academia missing, and I think it is missing a lot of that, like, okay, here's how the environment is changing and here's how like we are fighting for a livable future, but how do we like process those emotions? And I think community and like movement spaces and like activism is such a part of that, like feeling like there are people doing good. Because if you just read the news, it's like the opposite of an activist space. It's like things are not good.
Yeah, totally.
But in those spaces, you're like, no, I'm actually going like door to door.
Yeah.
It seems,
Yeah, and I think another thing is like it's just so powerful to be around people that are doing similar work and have similar values. And it was almost like a form of accountability to be around peers that I looked up to so much, and was like, I'm honored to be working with you, and I want to keep doing that, and I want to keep showing up for you. And I think there's something so powerful about like that community that is kind of the antithesis of all the individuality that is kind of shoved down our throats all the time. Just in society of like, even in school, it's like you want to get a better mark than someone else, or like it's very competitive, but just kind of that community oriented way of being and way of being in relationship with other people, I think is really powerful to me.
When it comes to the climate movement or any of these like activist spaces, like sometimes I do feel like, for me, burnt out from like, if you call it climate work, but if you call it like community work and you're still working, like you get up out of bed to like help out the people that are still doing the good fight or like being really involved and active and engaged, then I'm like, okay, I need to step up for them, not just like for climate or for the future. Of all the work you've been a part of, is there a movement or community that's really stayed with you or shaped you the most?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Social Justice Center for sure is a big one. We had this like motto. It was like, a motto is kind of a weird word, but just like a way of organizing, I guess. And it was the how is the why. So how we do things is why we do them. We don't do things, to achieve certain end or to get to a certain point. It's like we respect each other. We respect our community. We build strong relationships. We show up for each other. And that is the how, and that is therefore why we're doing that work. It's to build connection, build community, and all these pieces. And in doing that, we will achieve the world that we want to see and the ends we want to see. And I think that is always like a phrase I just come back to when I ever have those moments of just like, what am I doing, or where are we doing this, or what do I do next even? I think it can be really helpful to just come back to like, how am I doing this? Am I being a good colleague? Am I being a good neighbor? Am I showing up for my friends? Like, I think that was a phrase that has really stuck with me from that group. Not to mention all the incredible people I also met through that space that continue to inspire me. And so, yeah, I think all the work that I did with that group has been really impactful, really powerful.
There's this question I had about, as someone who I would say more often than not, feels overwhelmed by everything that needs to be fixed about our world, from housing, climate, justice, liberation. It can feel hard to know, for me, where to focus. And in your experience, is it more effective or sustainable to choose one area and dig deep into that, like maybe what you're doing with like your climate campaigning work, or to stay connected across all the movements?
Yeah, I totally hear that. Like, it is super overwhelming. and if you wanted to, you could be in a group on housing, on climate, on migrant rights. Like, you could be at an event every single day on a different issue, right? There's so many things to care about. So I definitely hear that, and it is definitely overwhelming. But I think for me, like, I care about all of these things so much. Like, I couldn't just choose one. I think I would just not be being true to myself if I was to kind of just say, it's climate or nothing kind of thing, because the climate doesn't stop at our doorstep. It is part of housing justice. It's part of labor justice. It's part of migrant justice. And so I think the intersection of these issues is almost the most interesting point to me. And I think it's kind of where we come to the best ideas and the best solutions for moving forward. And so, yeah, I think continuing to build cross-movement solidarity is really important. And I love to hear what housing groups think about certain policies and how can that inform what I'm advocating for. And so, yeah, I firmly believe that we are stronger together. And so I love staying connected across all the different movements and showing up for Palestine, showing up for Indigenous rights. And I think that also speaks to just when I think about the future and what would the future that we want to work towards be. I don't if we hit emissions reductions targets, but we're still bombing Gaza, or we've trampled Indigenous rights in the process. That's not a win to me. That's not it's just not. And so I want to work towards a world with all of these pieces incorporated, with Free Palestine, with land back, with housing for everyone. So they're all connected. And so, yeah, I think just seeing those connections and continuing to work towards a world where all of those pieces are accounted for. And yeah, I think that is kind of what inspires me. So, yeah.
I think there's a good balance that we can seek to find of staying engaged and staying involved in various movements. And like you said, yeah, what's climate work without human work? And that's kind of at the core of what I think we should be doing as climate activists, is engaging with humans and trying to make our lives better. We don't want to just live, we want to thrive, and we want to have a really beautiful future, and we want to feel really connected to our neighbors. We're not just trying to meet emissions targets, like you said. That's not the end goal. The end goal is taking care of one another. Yes. Which seems easy enough, doesn't it?
But, yeah.
So what's so hard? I don't know. Money, capitalism. Amazing. Well, not amazing, but I think that's a really good reflection. So let's talk about your climate campaigning work. Decarbonization is a word we hear a lot, but what does it actually mean in practice? And what does it look like when a city or region is trying to decarbonize?
Yeah, decarbonization is a big, kind of scary, weird, wonky word. I think for me, it just means moving towards reducing our reliance on fossil fuels until it's basically nothing, until it's zero. And when we're talking about a city or a region that's trying to do that, we're thinking about all the systems that rely on fossil fuels, whether that's buildings, transit systems, and how do we move away from that, increase efficiency. But also an important part is we're not just replacing one for one with electrification to gas, right? There's also has to be a reduction piece where we are building more efficient systems, but also reducing our use of just energy in general. Yeah, that's kind of how I would think about a place that's trying to decarbonize. It's reducing that reliance, and till eventually, right, the impact of that would be that we're no longer expanding fossil fuels because we don't need them, because our society doesn't run on them.
That's a good answer, and it makes me think of, I think growing up I would hear reduce, reuse, recycle, the 3 R's, but towards the end of my college degree I started hearing reducing and just actually not using as much energy. I don't really hear a lot of talk on that at a municipal level. You do just see people bragging about LEED or LEED certified buildings, or you see people talking about you see on buses, and even airports will be oh, we're a carbon neutral. I don't know if any airport's carbon neutral, but I think there's one in Dallas that really brags about being a more green airport. But I don't really hear a lot of on the ground talk about really reducing. Do you see that in the spaces that you're working with or that you're advocating? What would that look like to reduce or advocate for reducing our energy usage?
Yeah, I think it's a tough question. I would say, yeah, I don't think I see it enough for sure. Like, I think a lot of the focus is oftentimes on like, wow, look how many EVs there are on the road, or, like you said, LEED certification and things like that, which are just swapping and not that reduction piece. I think like one example of how we could be doing this is expanding like transit systems and fare-free transit as well, so that more people are able to use transit, and in doing so we just take cars off the road. That's less vehicles, that's more person per vehicle, and that is a way of just overall reduction, because less people are driving, there's less cars. It's not all just we just went to EVs instead, right? It's actually taking the vehicle off the road. So I think that that's one example of like how we could actually be reducing.
And this is like, that's very like city focused, like right, with like public transportation. Totally. I'm like very curious, and I do know that like cities are, I actually don't know the statistics, maybe you know a bit better than I, probably you do, but cities are definitely like leading in terms of like our energy use and how we're like impacting climate change. But like in rural communities, like what is that?
Yeah.
Do you like have an idea of what that would look like?
Yeah, no, that's such an important point. Never leave the rural communities behind, for sure. I think expanding like inner city, inner regional transit systems can be part of that. We certainly don't see enough rail, inner city buses, especially like, even not super far rural communities, but like even to suburbs and things like that. So I think expanding transit options there can still be, a component to that, and should be a component to transit reform. So yeah, I think like that is probably the biggest thing, is just like building out those systems so that they exist for people, and talking to rural communities about like what routes are most important to you, what do you need access to faster, and like how can we build systems to make that work. So yeah, I think that is a very important piece of transit reform for sure.
Yeah, I know we're talking about decarbonization in the fossil fuel industry, but that also like brings up, accessibility. Like people need to get to hospitals, and
Totally.
People need to access services. Is that oftentimes like cities have such a higher concentration of those services. So not only, if we could like bring more sustainable forms of transportation, it also like increases accessibility to
Definitely
services that people need. So that kind of like that ties into, it's all connected. It's not just like one thing or the other. And oftentimes making like positive environmental impacts like does help social justice issues and initiatives. I'm curious about who are key players in the decarbonization process. Are we talking about municipal governments or federal governments, industry, communities? Who has power and who's being left out?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone has a role. A lot of the work that I do is focused on governments, whether it's municipal, nations as well, federal, provincial, because governments kind of set the policy and set the goals and set the targets, and in theory can regulate industry and have power over industry. Government can regulate and set targets that won't allow industry to continue to expand, and they can say no to projects. Like, they actually have the power to say no. And so a lot of the advocacy work we do is focused around policy changes, being involved in environmental assessment processes, and really working at that level, because we do need that system-wide change. And so, well, yes, communities absolutely have a role. It's great if you and I want to hop on our bikes instead of get in a car. But at the end of the day, like, the reduction in emissions that we need to see is at such a grander scale than just anything that any one person can do. And so that is why we really need to be focused on governments that can set policies that will actually have these broad sweeping changes that will meaningfully reduce our emissions. So that is why, like, a lot of the work we do focuses on all levels of government, because they all kind of control different pieces, whether that's building regulations, zoning regulations, whether that's regulating industry like the fossil fuel industry, assessing projects and things like that. And so, everyone kind of has a different set of powers and control over the decarbonization process transition. A lot of the work we do will be focused on government because of that need for very broad and society-wide change.
Is your work as a climate campaigner with Wilderness Committee, is that like, are you really engaging with the British Columbian provincial government, or are you engaging with federal government as well?
I mean, most of the work that I would do is directed towards the provincial government, because a lot of like the environmental assessment process for new fossil fuel projects like liquefied natural gas facilities and pipelines, a lot of that is regulated by the provincial government. They do the environmental assessments, they approve, or they can say no to projects. And so that is why like a lot of my focus is on that, but also paying attention to what is happening federally. And, you know, our new prime minister has been very clear that he supports conventional energy. We are certainly paying attention at the federal level as well, but in terms of like how we can engage our supporters and how they can be involved, it is more helpful usually to focus on the provincial level.
Can I ask, what is conventional energy? Why
oil and gas.
Oil and gas.
Yeah,
Okay.
That's what
is there
we're
a
talking
reason
about.
It's called conventional?
I mean, I think convenient. It's also kind of like I think oil and gas, maybe people have a more adverse reaction to.
Mm-hmm.
Conventional makes it just sound like pretty neutral.
Like it's the thing.
Yeah, it's just what we do.
a-
Like, come on.
That's the conventional method.
Yeah, and it's a misnomer. Let's call it what it is. It's fossil fuels. It's fracked gas. So.
And not to put you on the spot, I know this wasn't like in the questions, but
Oh, okay.
do you have like a kind of clear definition? If I was like an 8th grader learning about fracking, like how would you describe that to me?
Oh man, no, it's a good question. Fracking is a way of extracting natural gas, and natural gas is a greenhouse gas. It's mostly methane, which is an extremely potent greenhouse gas. I think it's something like 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide, which is the one we hear about the most as a greenhouse gas. Kind of the very high level basics of like how fracking works. Basically, there's like a mix. There's this fracking fluid. It's a mix of like a ton of toxic chemicals, a lot of fresh water gets used in this process, and is shot into the ground at a really high pressure to crack the ground and release natural gas which then is like compressed into pipelines, goes to these facilities where I think it's cooled to be liquefied as liquefied natural gas, transported, and then used as fuel.
Yeah, I don't know what I thought, but I thought it was like changing it from, and maybe that kind of is what you're saying, like changing it from like one element or substance to like a different kind that we like use for, maybe that's kind of what you're saying, but I didn't like really picture like the ground cracking.
Yeah.
That's wild. Like, what are the alternatives?
Yeah, renewables. We love renewables. There's hydropower, which is a lot of the power here in BC. There's also solar, wind. The government did approve 9 new wind projects. They are still expanding. Fossil fuels at the same time. Those are kind of like the alternative energy sources, and BC has huge wind potential. Like I said, we're mostly running on hydro, so it is possible. We can do it if we continue to invest in more. Imagine what we could do instead of locking ourselves into fossil fuel projects that will probably be stranded assets pretty soon anyway. So.
Do you know if there's statistics on like if there's trajectories, or if they've like done any data maps that show if they are currently accepting like these wind energy, do you call them farms or like wind farms?
Farms.
If they're like also accepting that, and they're also at the same time accepting these like conventional oil and gas industry permits, are there like do we have at least a positive like correlation between like they're accepting more of these more sustainable forms of energy versus like, and they're accepting less of these conventional methods, or is that just not?
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily it's not like a 1-for-1, like one wind farm doesn't equal one fossil fuel project. So yeah, I don't necessarily know if there's like a comparison, and like as long as you're still approving fossil fuels, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it matters. It's important to be building out renewables, but whether, the gas is being burned here or anywhere else in the world, like the climate doesn't know borders.
Well, thank you for explaining it to me, because sometimes as someone who is more of a wildlife person, and I really like to talk about like birds and ecosystems and marine biology and anything like animals gets me really excited. And so coming into climate like later on in life, like climate science, it can be kind of daunting because it is like definitely big ideas to understand and like very complex images and visuals to understand, like even with fracking and all the ways that like we go from what we call like natural gas like into like a usable kind of energy source, like it's a really complex method.
No, totally. And I'm not like, I don't have a science background, and so a lot of the work for me is trying to kind of translate that knowledge of like, these are pretty technical things, and like how do we communicate that to people in a way that doesn't feel daunting, and like that we feel like we can talk about it, because like we should be able to talk about it, we should be able to talk about fracking, but there is kind of like this barrier of like, what does that even mean? And it's explained in these really complex ways. And so, even for me, like, it's taken a lot of reading, and I'm still learning all the time, but just continually trying to like think of ways to explain things in a way that is accessible and allows people to feel empowered to talk about issues that, you don't need a degree to talk about. So
and I think that that's pretty strategic from their end, in terms of not really making it accessible for a general public to understand or see or be a part of. And I think that that's seen throughout like so many forms of government and systems, and it's caused a lot of like problems and just like othering kind of this, like we can't be a part of the solution even though it affects us, because they've othered us by like leaving us out of the conversation and out of the like attainability of even knowing what's going on.
Definitely.
So I think you're doing good work.
Thank you.
To try to bridge that and be like, haha,
I try.
I'm actually teaching people what this means and like how we can be a part of that solution. Well, I said now onto the fossil fuel industry. I think we're kind of already on it. It's huge, messy, and can feel abstract. And when people say, or it can feel abstract when people say we need to end fossil fuels, I was wondering if we could break it down just like a little bit more. When we say the fossil fuel industry, are we talking about oil companies, utilities, governments? We kind of already talked a little bit about this, but when we say fossil fuel industry.
I think we're mostly talking about, so these are companies, but there's also all the other companies that are involved in like the process of building out fossil fuels, whether that's construction of pipelines, whether that's setting up the fracking sites, whether that's the financing side of things that makes these projects possible. All of those pieces contribute to the fossil fuel industry as a whole. So I think those are kind of like the main players that we're focused on and talking about when we talk about them.
I'm just like curious, when we're talking about the fossil fuel industry and climate, would you have like any kind of clear, obviously there's a clear link to those things 100%, but if you were summing it up again to someone like who didn't really know exactly firsthand like how these are connected, what are these like conventional methods like oil and gas doing to change our climate? Like how are those connected?
We're burning fossil fuels at an unprecedented rate, and this is raising carbon dioxide levels in the environment to a rate that we just have never seen before, and that's kind of the human element of it, because there are natural fluctuations. It is at a level that is beyond those natural kind of variations, and that contributes to global warming and overall rising of temperatures. And that is why we see like more extreme weather events. And it's not that we haven't always had like heat waves or hotter times, but it's that they become more frequent and more intense with the changing environment. And so that is why we are constantly seeing like record-breaking years on temperature and like these fire seasons that are increasingly stronger, worse, and so forth. It's like, it's not that they haven't always happened. It's not like climate change is like a match or something, but it just makes it more intense, prolongs it. It means that, it's drier beforehand, which means fires burn more. It's things like that. So,
and I'm just someone, I like to like get down to the basics.
It's important.
For everyday people, there are definitely still people out there that maybe don't know that some things are deeply connected. So
totally.
I think it's helpful. And so I was wondering, what does resistance to the fossil fuel industry look like today? Are we talking about policy, direct action, public education? I think you're kind of involved with like all of those things.
Yeah, definitely all of them. All of them are important pieces. I think like on the policy side, kind of what we were talking about before about just like government regulation. They have the power to regulate industry, to say no to projects, and in theory enforce that. And so pushing the government to just do their job and actually do those things is an important way to fight back against the industry. But direct action is also really important. I would point to frontline communities. The Prince Rupert gas transmission, for example, was just approved, and it crosses Indigenous nations' territories without their consent, and so there's been on-the-ground resistance there, and I encourage folks to listen to those voices, and, you know, the Gittinyahu Hereditary Chiefs, the Lockheed Firekeepers. I encourage folks to support and follow along with them. So there is definitely, direct action, on-the-ground resistance to these projects. And that is another form of fighting back against industry. Public education is incredibly important. The majority of people in BC live in, the southern part of the province and aren't aware that industry is up north and where most of the fracking happens, and aren't aware of all the impacts, the health impacts that has for the communities nearby, what that means for species, for the ecosystems. Educating the public about what is happening in their province and bringing people along and countering a lot of those industry narratives out there that, the industry loves to greenwash and say we have like the cleanest natural gas, or like, they point to all these kind of weird statistics and so forth, and calling it out, calling it what it is, it's greenwashing, and bringing the public along is it's a huge part of all the work. So
I still remember seeing like my first like big garbage disposal truck that says like we're going green, and it was like supporting natural gas. Yeah. And I'm like, what are you getting at there? What does that mean? Yeah. Why do you think that they even like think that they can get away with that? Is because the word natural isn't like they asked like this is a natural solution?
I think natural gives it kind of this like air of like this is normal, right? This is like it's a thing that's out there, so we should use it. So like even one small way of countering that is just calling it fracked gas instead of natural gas, because that more accurately describes how it is being extracted, and I think it kind of helps punch a hole in that kind of veneer of like this is just kind of a benign, normal thing.
Isabel will be going to, you said northwestern BC or northeastern BC?
Northeast, yeah.
Northeastern BC, and what's your intention with that?
Yeah, I think the intention is to get on the ground and to see fracking infrastructure. I've never seen it before, and so I think it's really important if I'm going to be campaigning on these issues to be there, but also to talk to community, talk to First Nations that are really impacted by development, and just hear what the community thinks. I think it's more of a listening opportunity for me more than anything. I don't know what it's like to live in the area where most of this development is happening. And so I think, it's really important for me to just listen and learn from people who are most directly impacted. So,
what are you most looking forward to, or even like most nervous about? Or is there anything that you feel like big emotions for doing this trip?
I think I am excited, maybe a little bit nervous of just like, I don't think I've never been there, so I don't know if I can really like picture it or imagine it. Like I just have no real point of reference, and I'm almost like, it can be devastating to see like just how much we've changed and altered and impacted the land, and to know, there are studies about the really damaging health impacts of living near fracking infrastructure, and just to think about what that means for community. Like it's actual people's lives we're talking about. There's been reporting about a lot of fracking induced earthquakes that have been happening as well up north. And so, I think it's scary, but it's also really, really powerful, and that much emotion can be like overwhelming sometimes, to just be like, wow, there's, I can really see very clearly, like to see like upfront the impact so clearly is very, I think it can just be very emotional. I found that in kind of all the different areas I've worked, of just like the most powerful moments are when you are actually talking to people and you're in space with them, and yeah, I think it can just, it's almost scary how emotional it can be. If that makes sense.
Yeah, like even doing, for me, field work in the interior BC with bird research, I found that like whenever I went past like Lillooet and like even through Williams Lake into like truly like interior, I won't say middle of nowhere because it's somewhere and it's beautiful and I loved it there, but very heavily affected by wildfires and just like that feeling of being surrounded by only like charred, or I don't know if that's the right word for it, but like burnt tree, and just like for like, well, I think miles, but you also think maybe sometimes in miles, for miles or kilometers, just like into the distance. It's such a weird and I don't know, like not to be dramatic, but like apocalyptic kind of like feeling of like, this is what wildfires are, a natural part of ecosystems, but like we talked about, like definitely they're increasing due to like anthropogenic induced climate change and global temperature warmings. Wildfires are starting earlier, they're going longer, they're more intense, they're harder to put out. I think even Squamish was like had a really intense wildfire recently. Is that right? Yeah. And of course, like even throughout like eastern Canada, there's right now, it won't be at the time of this podcast being released, but there's a intense heat wave like in eastern Ontario. It was like 42 degrees in Ontario yesterday when we were on the phone with family. That's wild. That's hot. I'm from the south, so I know what like 42 degrees looks like. Hot. But it's hot, and a lot of people don't have air conditioning in Ontario. So that's just really wild to think about what that would look like. And so being surrounded by like wildfires, or like the ghost of wildfires past, is really haunting. And kind of beautiful because it's quiet. It's like very new growth. It's like a few American goldfinches around and like yellow bright plumage against this like charred burnt forest. So anyway, it's definitely moving, and I feel like those opportunities are like the things that we live for as like climate activists, is just like being moved, because I'm not moved when I see the news. I mean, I am, but like there's a point where you just it's too much. And being like meeting people and like actually hearing real stories and like being surrounded by what it is you're working on, whether it's like with birds and like burnt forest or like near these like fracking industry buildings, like I imagine that'll be pretty emotional and really good work that you're doing. Okay, is there anything that you think people often misunderstand about the fossil fuel industry or decarbonization that you love to clarify or push back on?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, specifically around just like climate policy in general and decarbonization, I think there is this narrative out there that a lot of politicians will run with, that like climate action and affordability can't go together. I think a great example is like the carbon tax. During the last election season, it was kind of just thrown around as like axe the tax because climate action is so expensive.
They're thinking too far, or sorry, not far ahead. They're just thinking for the now, I feel like.
They're thinking for the now, but it's also like a lot of, it's kind of just like a political scapegoat, and it's just kind of this thing that's thrown around. It's like, we're going to work on affordability because this climate, and take away this climate policy because it's too expensive. And it's like a lot of people actually got the carbon tax back in the tax credit, and so that was actually like a check for a lot of low-income folks. And so actually taking it away could be harmful for them. And it's also not a meaningful way to address the cost of living, because the biggest thing people spend on is housing. And so if you were actually intentional about wanting to work on the cost of living, like talk about rent control, talk about all these other things that impact a larger portion of someone's budget, and don't blame it on climate action, which can work with affordability. Like something like fare free transit is a way of making people's lives less expensive, but also reducing emissions. Something like rent control or vacancy control that allows people to have more agency over where they live, specifically if we're going to be having more heat waves and extreme weather. Like people need agency to be able to, turn on the heat or turn on the AC without like fearing about their bills being astronomically high. And there are ways to, install heat pumps or build our retrofit buildings, that like there are ways to make life more affordable and also work on climate at the same time. And I think they've kind of been artificially siloed by governments to say we can't do one because we have this other issue. And it's like, no, we can actually do two things at once. And there are policies that when you talk to people working in poverty reduction spaces and working in climate spaces that agree with each other and have same ideas, and those solutions do exist, and we can fight both crises, which are both incredibly important and very real for people on the day-to-day. Yeah, I think there is this idea out there that like climate action is expensive, and so therefore we have to just do it at some later unknown date. And it's just not true. So also, I guess one more point on that is like with like fossil fuel expansion in BC with LNG exports, which we're going to be an exporter of LNG, I think, next week. So that is sad. But like there are studies in the US and Australia that when they became exporters of LNG, like domestic prices went up as much as 2 times, even 3 times. And so we'll have to see what happens with BC, but there's evidence that suggests that by allowing us to export LNG, that it will raise prices domestically and make people's lives more expensive. And the government is actively choosing those policies. And so claiming that climate action and working on making life more affordable like can't go hand in hand is just not true. That might have been a policy nerdy way of thinking about it, but I think it's frustrating to see that and hear that in the news a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you tied in really well to like what we were even starting our conversation with about how it's not always just like, we're not just like talking about climate or housing or infrastructure or affordability or access to healthcare even, and some of these other services. Like it really is all connected. I know we say that a lot, and we use words like community a lot, so helpful maybe to like break that down, but I think you've done really well at like breaking down how connected and like collaborative we have to be when it comes to like engaging in climate activism. So I really appreciate that. But that note was it was an important note to nearly end on, but I'm just like wondering, well, it's called Seeds of Hope.
Yes.
Do you have any? Are you hopeful, Isabel?
Oh, what a question.
Have you ever been hopeful?
Have I ever been hopeful? I mean, I think the answer has to be yes. Like, I don't think we'd be here if we didn't have some hope that things could be better. It's hard. It is so hard to be hopeful, especially when it just feels like the government continually moves in the wrong direction, whether that's on immigration or whether that's on, climate. Like on all issues, it often feels like I'm often wringing my hands. I'll say that for sure. Not to be super full circle all the time, but like I think it just does come back to community, and just like I'm hopeful because I have amazing colleagues and friends and people like you that I just met today, and I get to see people doing amazing work every day, and it's like if they're gonna keep showing up and keep fighting, like so can I. And yeah, to keep being full circle, like it does come back to like the how is the why. It's like, okay, if I'm feeling really upset or really angry, it's like, okay, how can I reach out to a friend, or how can I connect with my colleague or ensure that they're feeling good in their work, and like how can we just come back to our relationships with one another. And yeah, I think that is kind of where I find hope and where I find purpose, is just like if I build up the people around me and support the people around me, support my community, and however that looks, we're doing what we can. And if I don't hold very close to my heart a vision of all the important issues to me, like yeah, I couldn't do this work. Like I have to hold hope that like there is a future out there where, we have meaningful climate action, where we have land back, where we have housing for everyone, where we have free Palestine, where we have all these things. I have to hold that, because otherwise I can't yeah, I can't do it.
Yeah.
I just can't. So
The more I especially me working in the youth climate space, that's something that I do see in the youth that a lot of the work with the Starfish Canada works with, are just youth that are hopeful and are full of energy and are aerial insectivores and moving and going and doing really exciting projects that inspire me every day. And I feel like any times that I start to lose that hope, other than watching the news and something terrible happening, is whenever I start to feel disconnected. And so I think that's really the issue, is there's that disconnect. And once you see there's so many people out there that have I don't want to say this similar or same mindset as you, everyone has different perspectives, but that's what's really beautiful, and that they care about different things, and they have different skill sets to bring different movements to the table. That does give me hope. I'm this world is beautiful, diverse, and empowered. And I know that there's got to be a way there, because what else could there be?
Exactly.
Not anything good.
You said it beautifully.
Yeah, you said it better.
No.
You said it better.
No.
I guess another final question is what role do you think youth or students should play in pushing back decarbonization work, or pushing forward decarbonization work, I should say?
Yeah, I mean, I think standing up, being loud, and not listening when people tell you we were kind of talking about earlier, this idea you have to be a super expert, you have to know every single thing to care about something. Absolutely not. If you care even a little bit, take that and run with it, and show up and connect with your community. The idea of a lot of climate is a lot of times framed in terms of we have to do it for the future generation, and I think that's absolutely true. And I hope youth continue to fight for that future, and I also hope that youth continue to fight for their grandparents and for all these other people that are already being impacted by climate change as well. And so I think just coming back to the people in your life, not being afraid to stand up to government, to participate in government processes that are often designed to be kind of exclusionary or make youth feel like they can't participate for some reason. You can, you should, you have a voice, use it, whatever that looks like for you, whether that is sending an email, showing up at a rally, however that shows up for you, that's important, that's valuable. Don't underestimate that.
You usually hear advocating for youth to fight for their future and a livable future and future generations, and you rarely hear, no, youth should be fighting now for their grandparents to have a livable environment to be in and to have a really beautiful end of their lifetime, to just enjoy being part of this earth, and to it's for all of us, and it's for now, it's not for way far ahead
in the future.
Thank you for your work at the Wilderness Committee. Thank you for your climate campaign work and all of your other social justice movement works. And thank you for sitting on a bench waiting for me for 15 minutes.
It was my honor.
I'm glad you believed in me.
Yes,
and
I do.
That you waited around for our little crew to show up today.
You can follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, Facebook, at the Wilderness Committee. And if you are hearing these things and you want to take action and get involved, you can sign up for our action alerts at the wildernesscommittee.org. Wildernesscommittee.org to get our action alerts, to figure out ways to get more involved. All spectrum of ways to be involved, as simple as sending an email, signing a petition, to showing up, meeting with your MLA. We can support you at wherever you are in your activism journey. So, yeah.
Today's episode featured Isabel Sue Zamoidzinas from Wilderness Committee. Special thanks to our camera operators, Britton McCubbin and Emma Cole McCubbin. This podcast was created with support from TELUS STORYHIVE. Special thanks to the Starfish Canada for helping bring this vision to life. I'm your host, Claire Marshall. This is Seeds of Hope, and we'll catch you in the next episode.